Okay, everyone, thank you so much for coming. For those of you who joined in person today, and thanks to everyone who's joining, listening to the podcast or the YouTube channel. This is Weaving the Future, and we're having a community discussion today with the topic of communal living, the joys, challenges, and importance. And there's all sorts of other words we could list with that. But joys, challenges, and importance is what we focused on to start with. So, what we're going to do today is have a discussion. Can you all see that shared screen, those of you joining in person? I'm going to share a little bit about how I've scoped the discussion or the way that I'm defining the idea of communal living. And then we'll have lots of time for discussion. So I'm just going to intersperse some questions into the discussion, and then end by this big idea or hope I have, which is to seed a community of practice for communal living. And I'll ask those of you that are here today and have the question out there on the podcast as well, and see if there's folks that are interested in joining a community of practice. So. All right. When I talk about communal living, there's all sorts of different words we could use, and I'll list a few in a minute. It's the idea of living in close proximity, some amount of sharing spaces and sharing resources with goals like fostering belonging, social support, and mutual aid to collectively meet our needs. And I especially wanted to highlight belonging, social support, and mutual aid in how I'm talking about that, because I feel like that's a lot of the reason that many of us are drawn to the idea of communal living. And it can look all sorts of ways, but I think that the way that we are currently living, many of us, or the way that we may have grown up, the way that a lot of the North American society or Western society lives is in separate houses with maybe not a lot of connection with our neighbors or others that live around us. Some folks are lucky to have close connections with family or maybe a network of friends, but many people don't have a lot of sharing of resources, a deep amount of social support, a deep feeling of belonging. And particularly this feeling of mutual aid stands out for me of if I know someone has my back, not just in an emotional way, but also in a material way. And that can be as simple as I have someone I can borrow a lawnmower from, but I think it goes even deeper than that in terms of what I feel I'm craving. What I hear a lot of my friends craving is if I were to get sick, who might take care of me without a huge burden on them? And if can I find myself in a group of people in a way of living where I don't have to work as much, for example, because I know that we're sharing resources and we're all meeting our needs together and generally spending less money, right, is what I mean by that. Oh, we have someone joining that was in the waiting room. So welcome, Trisha. Okay. So there's a lot of other terms that can be used, and all of them maybe have slight differences in terms of their connotation or what we think of when we hear them, or how people use the terms. Eco-village is one that is used often, and that tends to be more explicitly living in nature and maybe regenerating nature in some way or regenerating the natural world. Intentional communities might have more of a strong vision guiding or a shared vision for why you're living together and what you hope to achieve or what your purpose is. Co-housing and co-living maybe are terms that are more often used in an urban or city setting where you're sharing space. And sometimes that's because you just can't afford to live on your own. So you find yourself sharing space, or maybe because you really have an intention or a vision similar to some of the other models. Sometimes there's often, especially maybe in other cultures, like South Asian culture, where people will live, many members of a family and intergenerational will live on the same property or in the same home. There's more and more tiny home communities. And then I also throw in this last point on the slides here is the idea of having separate homes, having totally your own space, living under your own roof, either, with a small family or a few people or on your own completely individually, but with some intention of building that sense of belonging, mutual mutual aid, solidarity, that kind of thing. I didn't want to leave that idea out because I've said before in other podcast episodes, for example, that it's not only about eco-villages, and not all of us are ready or actually want to live in an eco-village type setting. And it doesn't mean we can't explore the skills of revillaging or of communal living. So this is a bit repetitive of the last slide, but the idea of, I wanted to throw in the term of revillaging for sure. I know someone who lives close to us, who lives at a community called the Shire named Jasper Circus, uses this term a lot, and I'm sure it comes up in other places as well. Revillaging, if it has like a very strong connotation for us, it's one we use often. Intentional community, having intention for why we're living together. And I also just listed a few other terms like living close to each other, relying more on each other for material and social support. And I just put a question at the end here for any of you attending live today, if there's any other terms or ideas or concepts that come up for you when you think about communal living that I haven't covered in this kind of high level review.
What does revillaging mean?
What does it mean indeed? Um, when I think of revillaging, I think of the idea that it's perhaps a more natural state for us as humans to live in a small village, whether that's, 20 to 40 to 100 to 200 people, where we know each other in a deeper way, and where a lot of our lives are spent doing things together, where our work is actually really tied with our home life and our village, as opposed to having our little box that we wake up in and then we move to another box to kind of do our work on our little computer box, and then we come home and then we're tired and we watch our TV box. Like having a more like mixed life. And I wonder if anyone else who loves the word revillaging, I'm looking at Trevor here, wants to say anything about what that term means to you, what it brings up for you.
Well, I like the re part. It's like, for hundreds of thousands of years, we've lived in village. That's how we've not only survived, but thrived. And so I like the reclaiming aspect of coming back together. So yeah.
Beautiful, thanks. Does anyone else want to say anything about what revillaging has brought up for them, or if they use the term, why they use that?
I like the idea of interdependence, and we have moved so far in the direction of independence. I don't actually need anyone. I could move through my life in the city and never need another person, and everything's transactional. Like I pay my money and I get my things. And so for me, returning to the village is about increasing our sense of interdependence, and barter trade, and just decommodifying our relationships and coming back into connection with each other.
Beautiful. I love so much about what you just said, the interdependence, decommodifying. And just to reiterate, my understanding of that is not everything we do in our lives requires us to exchange money or energy or goods of some kind, but we just exchange love and care and services and goods because we care about each other, and we give that from like the joy of our heart. and belonging and care. I think I said that already, but I don't know if we can say that one enough. Great. Anything else before we move on?
Yeah, first of all, hi everyone. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone. I couldn't get on my laptop and I can't figure out how to get my real camera working. Anyways, yeah, I like to draw a distinction between village and communal living, because I feel like I've lived communally, which means that everything is blended, like finances, food, accommodation, everything is communal. And then there's the village that I feel like I live in now, which is like there's independent households, there's independent finances, there's collective things that we do together. Consciously, we're choosing to do things together, but we're not all tied to each other at the hip with finances, and we don't all live in the same space, if that makes sense. So for me, that's the distinction of village versus communal.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for making that distinction. And to be honest, I wasn't quite sure if communal living was the right umbrella term for everything I wanted to cover. We don't need to get too caught up in the actual terms themselves, but I appreciate that distinction of living in, tied at the hip, perhaps under one roof, or living in some way tied together in close proximity, but not necessarily in the same house. So you've led us right into the next piece, Trisha, though I hear Trevor has something he wants to say.
I just throw one more thing in.
Yeah.
Charles Einstein has the concept of interbeingness, which I really
Mm.
also really like, and just kind of really focusing on that we are relational beings, and that our very existence depends upon that, like the essentialness of that interconnectedness, not just for like resource sharing, but that our health and our ability to thrive is like that is. Anyways, I'm a relationship person, so that's kind of I really align with that idea of interbeingness.
Mhm. And would you say that's a step, um, an even deeper level of interdependence, or is it just like a different word that helps us like draw on even more of that idea of interdependence?
Uh, I think interbeingness speaks to a deeper level of we are relationships. That is who we are as social beings, and that is that's what's I think different about it. Dependence, we can depend on each other, but knowing that without it, it's like just a real zeroing in of focusing on
Mm.
that we are relationships. That is what we are. I don't know. It's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, beautiful. Great. Well,
Thanks.
we've touched a little bit, I think with Trisha's distinction on the difference between, let's say, communal living and village. So maybe we can swap the word here that we use. I'd love to hear from each of you that want to share. Certainly anyone can say no, who's attending live and just listen. But if you can say your name and a little snapshot of your journey. So for example, I'll say for me, I lived in communal type homes often when I was growing up, and that was often because of income. On my mother's side in particular, we lived in a few rare shared rental houses, which wasn't always a joyful way of communal living. And as I came into adulthood, I had a few partners who wanted to go into communal living, and I had to grapple with that feeling of like, oh, people are really close together. I don't know if I want that. And generally found that it was really, it felt like the richest and truest way to live. And the journey has been to find a way to do communal living or living in closer proximity that has worked for me. So I lived with a suite in a house I lived in Kamloops. Rochelle, who's on the call today, lived in that suite, and we also had another family in the suite at some point. So I had my son, who's now 7, and a family with a couple of kids, older and younger than him. And then we also owned a big piece of property near Kamloops, 160 acres, and attempted to go into the eco village But ultimately, many things got in the way of that, including not having the material or human resources to really launch it in a very remote location that was off grid. And where I'm at currently is in a house called the Manor of Love with Trevor, who's my partner. Jen is with us here today, and she lived in the Manor of Love when they first found this property. Trevor and Jenna were partners at the time. And there's been a number of people who have lived here over time, and we're currently in a good place in terms of who's living here and how we feel and what we've learned about how to call in folks. And Rochelle is on our property as well. We have a big house that has 5 people, 4 grown-ups and my son who's 7, who's here part-time. And then we also have a carriage suite that has 2 different suites, and Rochelle is in there, and another roommate and a third person is moving in soon. So lots of folks on our property. So I'd love to hear from everyone. I actually meant to do that in a really succinct way so that we could all do it in a succinct way. So maybe you can all do better than me, but we have lots of time. So it'd be great to hear from each of you, your name and what your own journey or current status is with communal living, or whatever word you choose, village. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Rochelle.
Through my life, when I was a child, my father really believed in having neighbors, depending on neighbors. And so we had a lot of family and neighbors, and we worked at the flea market every weekend. So there was a lot of social there. So we used bartering systems together. And it's something that really stuck with me till today, is that that's something that I thrive in, is being able to be, interdependent, what Jenna said, and interbeingness. And it's something very interesting to me. Revillaging, being in a village together and bartering and working and being together and using each other's resources. And it's something that's so interesting to me. And I feel like I'm getting closer and closer and closer to that. Right now I'm living in the sweet spot. Trevor named it the sweet spot. It's a very good name. We love it here. And I say that we're on a communal property, because we come together with our resources, our intelligence, and we try to do better and to be better together. And I've been really enjoying it. And it's really hard at times because things come up and we're able to process together. And it's been a really important journey for me, is to be able to process together with other people. So, and doing the work on my own to be able to process with other people. So my journey keeps showing me that this is something that I want, and to maybe work towards an eco village and revillage. And I like all these words, so I wrote them all down. I'm going to try to use them as much as I can. So yeah, my journey is to be in close community with other people and to do a lot of work together. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Rochelle. Would anyone like to go next?
Sure. I don't know how succinct I can be, but I guess the thing that I most think about is that communal living feels natural to me. Non-communal living feels unnatural, in that I grew up in a small town and I have a really big family. So I'm always been used to, like, neighboring wasn't a term I really used until my degree, learning about urban sustainability, because it wasn't something I was taught or had to think about. It was just, in a small town, it's just natural. You know everybody, and we know when people need things. And so it was adjustment moving to the city where you have roommates, and sometimes that was just it. So then when I moved to Calgary, years ago, I went through a bunch of different living situations, but something was always missing. And when I finally met someone and we lived on what we call 5A, and even though we were roommates upstairs, we intentionally chose communal living. And I see Robin smiling because that's when I met Robin. And we sort of made our whole house and our neighborhood, you know, we connected with people on the streets who also shared in that idea. So we started to share our streets. We started to, in rogue ways, take over sort of public spaces together. And that's when I really learned about communal living in that sense. And then when I moved to Toronto, I met my now husband, and I moved into his house that he was sharing and somebody else rented downstairs. Eventually, we took over the whole house, and we created a communal living space in what we called Little Caltoria, and that was just an amalgamation of where everybody came from. Calgary, Toronto, Victoria. It changed. It evolved from Little Calgary to Little Calgoria to Little Caltoria, and eventually the landlord too wanted to sell that property, and we transitioned it to a very small apartment above his store even. So we found out you can kind of do it anywhere, even when you don't have a large house. But I know that it is not what our life looks like now. When we moved to Vancouver, you know, we lived on our own and we started a family, and now we're exploring what that looks like again. And I could go into more about that because Calgary is going through a huge shift. And so I'm hearing people talk about communal living or living together in a different way that I never heard other people talking about, or I never imagined would be talking about that, in some ways out of necessity. But me knowing that it doesn't just have to be necessary, it can be meaningful as well. So yeah, that's my very succinct sort of little journey. I hope that was succinct.
What came to mind as you were talking is I love hearing people's stories. So let's not stress about being succinct, as long as we're not like taking up the rest of the time to tell our whole life story about communal living. But it was beautiful to hear that and to be reminded of when I met you, and I lived a couple blocks away, but felt part of that community. Lovely. Thanks, Tess. And who would like to go next?
Oh, I'll jump in.
Thanks,
And
Trisha.
have a long life. It might take hours and hours. I was just recalling that I grew up in logging camps, kind of remind me from the last speaker there that it was a village, because sometimes there would be only 10 families living in these logging camps. Of course, everybody knew everybody. And there was a lot of sharing that went on. So that I existed in that for most of my growing up years until I was 17, when I actually moved to Duncan. So this feeling of small town village it's in my bones, right? And and from there, I very quickly moved into a communal house in Vancouver, and then I went to a communal farm in Abbotsford where I lived for 20 years, and that really, to me, was bliss, living on that communal farm with 50 other people, and living a purposeful, meaningful, collective existence. I thrived in it, and then the leader died and the whole thing kind of fell apart. But at which point my current husband at that time my past husband at that time decided we wanted to recreate community, but we just didn't know how. We lived in it, and I say it's easy to maintain community, but it's hard to build it. And I think, you know, when I met Michael, my current husband, we realized, gosh, we want it, but we don't know how to do it. And so we've been in this process for the last 10 years of learning how to do it. And I would say at this point, we don't think we're really successful, but we're still on the path. And it takes a lot in our current culture to want to live together. And I think the financial housing crisis in Canada has forced the issue a bit. And so there are people living together now who would much rather not be living together. But I think it's a beautiful thing, because it's a capacity that each one of us used to have. As Trevor was saying, we knew how to live together in village. We knew how to live and repair, and we don't know how to do that anymore. So we have to, but we're scared and we're not very good at it. But we seek to be communal. And I think that's the part where we're finding the challenge is how do we blend people who in some ways they want to live together, but they don't have to. Do you know what I mean? There's no financial pressure. They're self-supporting, but it is like, how do we weave the hearts together and the vision together? So we're in that process again right now, which is really, I'm really excited about.
Thanks so much, Trisha. So much rich experience and learning that you bring and leadership. Who would like to go next?
I'm happy to go next. Hi, Trisha. This is Jenna, and I currently live on Abundance Community Farm out the Fraser Valley. And what I'm finding as an interesting thread of connection, and what I'm hearing so far is the origins of people's longing to be in community comes oftentimes from the elements of how we grew up, influenced one way or the other. And I loved what Trisha said about not successful, but still in it and still trying. And so I grew up in a really large extended family, and we actually owned a resort. So at one point in my childhood, and so there was this real sense of like flow and flux of people coming and going, and everyone seemed like family. The staff, the people that returned every year, all of my cousins that would come and be at the farm at the resort. And so I think that seeded in me this sense of joy in this extended sense of network and connection. And for me, it also represented a degree of chaos. And sometimes I struggled with the connection. And so it seeded sort of my path as a nonviolent communication trainer and studying conflict resolution, and really wanting to understand how do we come into connection with each other, and deep and intimate and interdependent, and navigate all of the things that arise when humans come into connection. So I started my journey of living interdependently outside. Like I was in Vancouver and I had my little cube apartment, and I went traveling, and I came back and I said, I don't want to do the cube thing anymore. Just like I go to work and I come back, and it just seemed crazy to me. And so created a community house in Vancouver and tried that. And so there's been several experiments over the years. And it's just like Trisha said, an ongoing learning of how do we do it? How do we come together? I think it's, I really hear a collective longing to come back together. I think someone mentioned it being like really innate. I think there is an innateness in us. You know, if you identify it, there's an innateness in us of wanting community and wanting connection and wanting that sense of belonging. For me, the nuclear family never really made sense. And so wanting to come and disperse that one primary connection that we have and spread it out over many people, so that there's more nervous systems that can be supportive, and there's more diverse ideas. And I think for me, it's a richer way of being in the world. And so, yeah, so that's sort of, I've come in and out of experiments, and I'm in this current experiment. And the project that I'm in now has been around for 8 years and has challenges. I mean, I don't know. What I was going to go with, we all have developed quite an independent nature through growing up the way we have in culture and capitalism and all those things. And so how do we come back into the village from who we are now? I don't think we could go back to 200 years ago. I don't think that would work. You know, we are who we are now. And so how do we come back in as educated, you know, with the resources we have and with the perspectives that we have, come back into connection and be interdependent. Yeah, it's a super interesting project. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jenna. And thanks for starting to acknowledge some of the real challenges and questions that come with living closer together, and sharing your story as well. Just towards the end of your share, I let Bonnie into the group, so I'll just say hi to Bonnie and let you know that we're doing a roundtable discussion right now, just answering, welcome, answering or giving each other a snapshot of our journey with communal living. And so we're hearing stories from us all around communal living, including where you're at now. So if you'd like to dive in when you're ready, you're able to. And is there anyone that would like to go next, including you, Bonnie? I saw that you were maybe mid-chew of your lunch, so no pressure.
I'll hop in because I might be a bit of an anomaly because I up until when COVID kind of hit, I didn't live in any kind of community. I lived in big cities in Toronto, lived in Vancouver, and actually was quite resistant to the idea of living with other people. And then Jenna was kind of like, let's live communally. I'm like, no. And so then we came over to the island and lived in we kind of jumped into a project and a bunch of people were looking for some land together, and it was kind of a temporary thing, and we discovered that there was not a good mesh with that. And then we came here we split off from that group, came here to this beautiful home, and I'm a convert. I'm totally in. Like, it's my thing now. Like, I really see the necessity, not just the value, but the necessity of it. So I'm all for it, and that's what I talk about a lot of the time is revillaging. And I think I always kind of thought of like wanting to be in a village. That's always kind of been my dream, like live close to people, but not in the same house. But here I am living in the same house with a few people, and so it kind of seems like we almost have a bit of a hybrid between communal living and like village. It's like because there is some reliance, we do share certain things, and so it's kind of an interesting experiment to learn because it's actually very different when you live in the same house. I've discovered it's like the details of like where somebody leaves their toothbrush and just kind of the little intricacies of like living right in the same home has been like to find the balance of that has been kind of tricky. But I figure that if I can figure it out here, the next step of villaging, and I think I would ultimately like a separate home. But yeah, I'm in. I'm excited. So, and I'm really enjoying it here. Like right now, it's been hard. So there's been some really hard points, but we're just right at a sweet spot right now, and it's really incredibly beautiful. So yeah, I'm gonna drink it in as it is happening in this moment. So that's me.
Thanks, Trevor. And I like that you said sweet spot, since that's the name of Rochelle's space, which is on our village. Pun intended.
Pun intended.
Beautiful. And would anyone like to go next? I know there's a few folks that have their cameras off at this point. Hannah and Bonnie, would you like to share your story, or do you want to sit this round out and join in on other discussion points?
Yeah, sure. I can share my story. Yeah, okay. So snapshot of my journey and status with communal living. So I mean, when I was younger, I had roommates and lived in houses with roommates and things. And I've also been my ex-partner and I built two tiny houses and lived on two different people's property. One of them was kind of like a typical urban backyard setting. So we lived like very closely with those folks. And then the other one was on a lot of property. And so we had a lot more space. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of beauty in communal living. Like, I really appreciated when we were doing that, especially like the tiny house living. How I felt like even though I guess it took my mind out of the private property ownership paradigm, and sort of discovered the ways that it's possible to feel really like connected to a piece of land without owning it, and to actually acknowledge that the beauty of the connection is in the relationship, not the like ownership of it. And so that felt like kind of mm, a deeper like understanding that came out of that communal living arrangement. That I think was really important, like kind of foundational about like how I think about both like connection with land and sort of what it means to own it, and whether that's even like possible. So yeah, and then I guess since then now I live in a house that has a suite, so I share the house but not my kitchen with anyone. And I really do like that. And I'm always kind of like dabbling. I have a spare room and have theater artists that come stay who are here for work contracts. They come stay with me sometimes, and I like sort of moving like in and out of sharing my like personal space, as you had mentioned, Trevor, like sharing the kitchen and the bathroom and things like that. I feel like there's times when that feels really life-giving and nourishing for me, and then there's other times where I'm ready to have a break from it. So I've enjoyed having that kind of flow of like people in and out, but no like permanent um roommates kind of situations. So yeah, that's me.
Bonnie, I also think it's really cool that your good friend who used to live in your suite is also now your immediate neighbor. And it seems like there's a lot of like flow between your two houses as well.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it definitely feels more like that kind of village vibe where we're over at each other's houses all the time. And yeah, and I think that's the other thing I really noticed, like even if I'm not sharing my immediate space, like the people who um live in such close proximity to me have become my best friends. And I read a study one time, or maybe I read like a summary of a study that looked at people in apartment buildings, and they asked people in the apartment buildings like, who's your best friend? And the likelihood that someone's next door neighbor was their best friend is like way higher than what would like statistically be sort of like probable. And even the likelihood of people's best friend being like not the next door but the one over, it like was way lower. And so it just like not, yeah, so there's just this, I think that humans are wired for sort of like proximal relationships. And even if you have to,
Yeah.
even if it's like a 10-minute walk or, you know, a 5-minute drive or whatever, you're a lot less likely to experience like closeness with those people. So
Interesting.
I find that to be like really true as well, that yeah, the people who are the closest physically are also closest sort of
Interesting.
emotionally. Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks for sharing. And would anyone else like to go and share their story? I think Hannah mentioned that you're not so sure about your connection today, but you're welcome to jump in and share, and we can see how it goes. Okay, thanks, Hannah. Okay, so I have a second question up here, which we can just do as an open discussion rather than doing roundtable, virtual roundtable and hearing from everyone. Would anyone like to jump in and talk about what brought you to the discussion today, or what draws you to explore communal living? I certainly heard that woven in with most people's responses. So it's more about adding, is there anything more that comes to mind in terms of this question of what draws you to living in closer proximity?
I can start unless Trish would like to dive in.
No.
I just had what motivated me to come Robin asked. I love Robin. Okay, here we are. And there's also this longing for, while I'm on land and there's a group of people and we are connected in so many ways. I'm also, and I've experienced this in other communities, not just the one I'm in, but I'm also very aware of the challenges that arise within community, and sometimes they're difficult to solve within the community. And I have this sense that there could be a mycelium network of resources that communities offer each other. I'm a facilitator, and so, you know, being able to bring my skill set to someone else's community, and someone else could bring their skill set and help my community. And it's one of the reasons I did the forum training in December on the island, because I wanted to meet other people that were doing community processes that could help us get through the challenges of being humans together in shared space, shared land, shared dreams, shared resources. So there's some longing for me of connection between communities, so that there's this expanded sense of shared resources.
Nice.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for naming that. And I would love to talk more about it before we end today, about how to create that network and support each other. Anyone
I think
else?
that's the very thing we were kind of talking about last night, is like developing a network, right? Not these silos, that because we all have probably something to offer, and that would all strengthen that mycelium network. So I'm super excited. I don't know if that's the community practice you're talking about, or potentially, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yay.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I having followed the history of eco villages over the last 30 years or 40 years, it's their commitment to each other, I think, has made them stronger. And so there's a whole bunch of collectives, people being in collective, that aren't eco villages, and so then they can't join that, if you know what I mean. So I think having a space for others is really great. And the distinctions of those, I think the reason that I'm here is, yeah, I'd love to hear about other people's experiences and what's working, how people made it work. For me, yeah, I think living in community is just my natural way of being. And so even if it's not working very well, I'm still completely committed to it. But there is, I love that sweet spot. There's a sweet spot that I'm looking for, and it has more to do with alignment of conscious alignment of purpose and those kinds of things. And so, you know, the co-housing movement's been around for a long time, and I've just never resonated with it, because it's like, oh, well, let's share a lawnmower kind of concept. And I'm like, oh, that's so not me. Yeah, so I'm looking for a way to hear more about how do communities come together that is this co-created alignment that's got to do with purpose and what would I say, shared activities, shared ways of being that support all the people in that collective.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Tricia. Okay, I'd love to move on unless anyone else has a burning share here. Go ahead.
I was hearing nods to talking about the resources and stuff, about asset-based, like thinking about asset-based community development, and that the idea that we all have something to give, that we all have something to bring, and that you can build with what you have. And it made me think a lot about the work I had been doing the past few years. And I think what brought me, well, I think I would just come to every podcast, no matter what the topic is. But that it's something that my husband and I have been talking about again, exploring. I mentioned Calgary's going through a shift, a very, very fast shift in the affordability and quality of life that people have been accustomed to here for a very long time. And it's quite a jolt for a lot of folks, having lived in other cities where these are challenges that people are used to in those cities, and it's not challenges people are used to as much here. And so with that has come this blanket rezoning that the city has implemented, where any single property landowner can go, I want to build a fourplex. I want to build a 4-row townhouse. I want to build a duplex. I want to build a laneway house. And you don't need rezoning. And so, like, over 65% of the city is like single family homes. And so it's very controversial, but it got us going, this could be a shift for communal living as well, like in a way that people don't even imagine. And it's been a boost for us because, the single family home is out of our reach, like so many people. And I love the city. And I love having a deep curiosity about how you make these ideas work in the urban setting and in really large cities, because that's where it's so necessary. It's actually good for the planet that a lot of us are living in cities, because if 8 billion people were spread out in villages across the world, there'd be no land left. Like, you know, um, so it's really important. We're just not doing it very well. And we're leaving people feeling very, very isolated. And I've seen that isolation through my work. I've seen people, would have coffee weekly with people who that might be the only time they're having a connection.
Wow.
And it happens a lot for older folks. And I don't want that for the older folks in my life. I don't want that for myself. I don't want that for my kids. So it's, again, like, maybe these are all opportunities. Sometimes when we're pushed into things, when we're pushed into change, that's where that whole innovation, one of my ickiest kind of words, but it's an important word, of innovation to move forward. And so I guess this being here is a boost, and the reconnection with things that I've always loved. But what could it look like going forward? Not going back to something, moving forward to something else, completely different.
Well, thanks, Tess, for sharing that. And it reminds me that you were always a voice in my life of not just eco villages, and of like really appreciating the city, the urban setting for what it is and what it brings. And as someone who's always lived in an urban setting, I feel torn between wanting to be out in an eco village more on land, and then recognizing that actually will probably mean that I'll be in my car whenever I leave the village. And I'm very used to a walkable lifestyle. So I'm actually like in a bit of a sweet spot, pun intended, for me now, at least next to the sweet spot. So yeah, it brings the question up of like, what is the ideal situation for us? And it is one of the questions I'd like to throw out there.
Can I just throw one thing in before?
Of course.
Tagging in on the end here, but why communal living? Like, for me, when I look as a counselor therapist, looking around and just witnessing the suffering in the planet, and also the irresponsible use of resources, like, to me, so much of the suffering for the people and the planet is because we've gone into this independent, siloed kind of way of living. Like, I'm a therapist and I'm a counselor. People come to pay me to help them where they would have got that support from the elders in the village. Right. So, and the maybe the heart of our suffering is a sense of aloneness. And Tess pointed that to thing around disconnection. Just like, there's so much that could be resolved through the coming together, and also just our ability to relate well to other humans. I think, when you live in community, and you have to figure that out. And while we're living in these homes all separate, we get into this kind of really kind of like independent mind state, and we don't understand cooperation or collaboration as much. It's just would be weaved into just what village. So I think so many of these suffering can be solved.
Yeah.
To move in that by moving in that direction.
Yeah, and it's cool that you started talking that way, Trevor, because as you were doing it, I was like, oh, next I'm going to put on this slide about what I've identified through the last few years is a vision for moving forward into a different way of being, living and working in radically different ways in the world. And these relatively simple ideas are what I keep coming back to, which is lives that are materially simple and relationally rich, connection, shared responsibility, and a sense of belonging with ourselves, each other, the web of life, and the land. And I just want to say I identified that as a vision and then met Trevor, and the land project that him and Jenna and a few others were starting, that was their shared vision. And I was like, what a coincidence. And it's not that intense that we had the same vision, because I think all of us are recognizing that collectively that it's what we're missing, this sense of connection and belonging. And then finally, a third aspect of vision is all of those things, those other aspects of vision leading to a regeneration of biodiversity, habitat, natural systems, and climate climate mitigation and resilience as well. So to me, as we're facing all the meta crisis, as I've heard it called more and more, of climate isolation, conflict, et cetera, we coming into community is both the way to deal with those hard things and probably the antidote or the cure to move forward into a different way of being. And another thing that I often point to is the idea that we're moving from this deep mindset of dominance culture and supremacy, that there can be a being or a type of being or a type of human that is supreme above all others, when in fact we are all coming back to the truth that we're all interbeing, that we're all connected with each other. We're part of the web of life as humans. And how we thought we could live in a way that forgets that is beyond me now. And yet the culture over the last thousands of years has gone more and more in that direction somehow. That there's a few humans on the top, and that humans in general are on the top. So let's come back from that. And then community is a beautiful way to do that. Oh, I forgot to move slides to show that. I'll just do that for the YouTubers and those live. This is I like this image of showing humans on the top versus all of us and around an interconnected circle. So another thing I'd love to do, and we can do this one at a time or popcorn style like we just did. Are there any wicked questions that stand out for folks? And I have a number listed already on a slide, so we can add to them. I can either show those now and we can add to them, or I'd love to hear what really stands out for you all in terms of a wicked questions.
Yeah, I have a wicked question. Maybe kind of a raggedy wicked question, but one of the things that I found with communal living sometimes is that there can be so much, like when there's tension, which there sort of inevitably is going to be, there can be so much like processing needed. And sometimes, for me, it's one of the reasons that I like to cycle in and out of having communal living arrangements like in my home. So I guess the wicked question for me is like, how can we live in a communal way without getting like bogged down by the processes of communal living? Because I think it is also important to acknowledge that there's sort of an opportunity cost for that energy as well, right? Like we could that sort of processing the minutia of how a house is managed and conflict and things like that, we could be spending that energy on other things that are equally as important. So that is one of the wicked questions that I have, is just doing the communal living, but not letting it sort of take over some of our life energy.
Yeah, I hear that. Thanks, Bonnie. And I'd love to hear maybe 2 more wicked questions, because I do have a number listed, and I also want to move into the joyful question of what are we longing for? What would success look like? So let's hear a couple more wicked questions and then go into that next one. Maybe no one else has any wicked questions. Perfect. Got it figured out.
I don't have a question, but a burning response to that question.
Oh, do you want to say it?
I could share it. I really believe it's about reclaiming embodied ritual.
Hmm.
I think as a species in the state of our evolution, we're very verbal, we're very intellectual, we're very rational, and I think we get stuck up here. I do it. I'm a communication person, and I think we lose the recognition. I think it's coming back into our animal bodies, and it's coming back into the other than human, the ways of seeing that are beyond our conscious kind of immediate thinking self. I think those are the things that we also need to bring back in as we go back to village. It's sort of like, how do we bring this modern being in brain and physiology into village? I think it really is about, I have a brief story about something Peter Levine said recently. I could share a short story if that's welcome, the timing.
I would love to hear it. Yeah.
He was working in some remote village somewhere, I'm guessing in Africa, and a mother lost her twins in birth. And she had been taken to the hospital to receive care, during the birth experience and everything. And she was in the hospital and just completely shut down. And her village came and, as he tells it, steals her in the night, because they were going to do like advanced, like more and more medical treatments, shock therapy and things, to try to get her to come out of her state. And they brought her back into literally the village. And they brought her and they set her in the side of the circle. She didn't have to do anything. And they drummed and they sang and they danced. And other women started emoting the grief that this woman wasn't able to access. And through the collective holding, she was able to access that grief and came back alive and rejoined the village. It's that kind of embodied ritual, music, rhythm, sound, that I think is part of this reclamation, that we'd be really remiss in leaving out.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And what it brings me back to, I really like your point, and I completely agree that so many of the things we're trying to solve or move past right now, the answer lies in the earth, in our body, in putting our left brain to the side, and not always letting it drive the bus and be the one to sort of figure things out or make decisions, because it feels too hard. But actually it's a lot more simple, and hard in a different way. I often say grief is harder than anxiety, or grief is easier than anxiety. It doesn't feel that way, but yeah, thank you for that, Jenna. And I guess I feel a longing right now, especially given that we're just at past the hour mark, to move past some of the wicked questions, because so often those wicked questions or barriers can hold us back, and talk about what we're longing for. I'm going to stop sharing for now. Talk about, I heard a question in someone's share of, we don't feel like we're successful yet. And it made me wonder, what does success look like for each of us? What are we what are we longing to feel and experience in community? And if you could imagine a community setting or an ideal level of proximity, or situation or level of interpersonal closeness or whatever pops up for you, what might that look like? So maybe we can just take a few moments and sort of fill into that silently, and then decide how to speak into it.
I'd like to go.
Okay. Thanks, Rochelle.
Success to me is living in close proximity and having people that feel safe around me, and also being safe around other people. And that means working towards that goal of feeling safe together and able to just be our authentic selves.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
My dream would be like when I just look around and I always have this question in my mind of why is there so much suffering on the planet? It boggles me sometimes. And there's a part of me like, ideally what I'd love to be is I envision that we have these networks of communities where the general mental health of folks gets better so that we're not in this state of like a me culture, and that we rise into like out of this, we call it wound frequency, and into well self-actualization to into the space where we get into creation. I mean, it's a lofty goal, but that's where I'd like to see us, that we're not, I mean, how many people are on medications for anxiety and depression and trauma? It's just all around. It's like, will it eventually get us to a space where we're held, where we feel safe, where all of our backs are covered? And then we can start to be in this space of like, yeah, creation.
Yeah.
I'd be totally into that.
Me too.
Yeah, I have that same thought too, Trevor. To me, it's my ideal, I guess, vision is like what I want is co-creation, engagement, a willingness to participate, even if it's out of your comfort zone, for the sake of capacity development, for to be of service to each other. Yeah, I think our culture is we're used to pay for services culture, and it's all about me, as if I'm separate from the whole, when in fact I believe that we're a system. We can't just I can't just get healed all on my own, even though that's what my culture tells me. But I have to heal in community, and it's a system that we're all in, so we're all in this together. So more recognition of that, more willingness to like just be with each other and make requests to have someone support me, even though I might feel scared and vulnerable to do that, and then feel willing to support somebody else. So yeah, that's what I feel is really important in coming together. The other thing that I think is like for people to be willing to step into leadership, even though that might not feel safe either. Like people might feel vulnerable doing that, but that to me creates the village, like when each person feels their power and their influence in the system. And yeah, that feels good to me.
If I can jump in, it's so interesting hearing the thoughts, because some of them are like pulling right from my head. When Trevor, you said, the first thought that came to my mind was being held. That like I think about so many people who are no longer in this world that may have felt differently if they had been held. And not just been held by folks who feel like they have a responsibility or that are their born family, that, you know, community can be our chosen family, and that can also be in the way that there's no pressure. Though I do believe that there needs to be more emphasis on shared responsibility. I have this perhaps ideal view that by more shared living, we may reconnect with that idea of shared responsibility. This return to citizenship rather than consumerism, that we hold a lot of power, that our voice matters, from the very large to the small, more connected, intimate spaces. And I think that there could be a lot more good in the world if folks didn't feel like it was so easy to check out. And when we are intimately connected with each other, it's a lot harder to just check out. From responsibility and from ourselves. This is my ideal view. Yeah, that idea of being held not only, I think, protects us, but keeps us accountable to hold others. And so that's something that really excites me in terms of myself, but also like greater change making. When I think about shared or communal living. So I got used to the word shared living a lot because the word communal scared people. So yeah, I think about that a lot, and I think another thought. What was interesting hearing you say, Trisha, about stepping into leadership. Having worked in community like really closely the last few years, I think leadership and the term and a lot that goes along with it is really intimidating for people. I think that a lot of people feel like once I step into leadership, I'm there forever. I think what communal living, what shared living, and that whole like sharing responsibility in a space or a community is that we get to take turns. And what leadership looks like for me might not look like the same thing for you. But I think as a society in Western culture, we've really emphasized be a leader, be this big, outgoing, never stop person, and that makes you a leader, right? Those are the folks who are really put up on a pedestal, and as though that's the only form of leadership, model of leadership. I know I was intimidated. I didn't see myself that way until people kept telling me, you are doing this, you are doing that, even though I step in and out of it. And I still feel that sort of imposter syndrome a lot. But I think if we can redefine that, like that it's really important, because if everybody's leading and nobody's following, we're not getting anything done either. So I think communal living, intimate sharing spaces, close proximity helps cultivate that as well.
Wow.
I'm just wondering about the word contribution as opposed to leadership. It's like, because we all have these beautiful gifts, right? And so.
Yeah,
I
I
like
like that.
that. I like shared living, and I like contribution and co-creation. Those stand out to me. Would anyone else like to answer what you're longing for, what your ideal situation would be, maybe what your vision would be for yourself living in shared living or in community? I'll just say a lot of what everyone has said really resonates for me. And I feel very lucky that I've had moments in time where I had a felt sense, an embodied sense of what it could look like and feel like, particularly growing up as part of a community who co-created a festival, a music festival. And during those days of that festival, I would say, this is the me I want to be. Like, I get to contribute. You know, I did various volunteer roles, and I got to play music, and I got to be celebrated by all these folks I grew up with for being on stage and playing music. And I got to wear beautiful, weird clothes and costumes, and I got to see the same people and drop in and feel held and celebrated. It was this, you know, expression. It was vibrant. It was celebratory. There was also depth to how we knew each other, and some of the griefs and struggles that we experienced together as a community. And in that community, for me, it was often only 4 days of the year. But I took that learning and brought it and, you know, pulled it forward into all these other aspects of my life, including the visioning that I'm now doing, or we're now doing, as part of Weaving the Future, and through Tapestry Collective Co-op, which Bonnie's here from Tapestry, and we're at some point in the next few months going to do an episode focused on what is the world we want to live in. That's our working title of a sort of visioning. That includes lots of what we talked about today in terms of shared living and moving away from commodification and all the different realms of life, like work and housing. So I kind of tangented there, or zoomed out in sharing. I guess I'll ask for one more call for if anyone wants to speak to sort of what is your heart or embodied longing that you'd love to experience in terms of your living situation or in your community. I hear Trisha's heart laughing in mirth, perhaps. Well, why don't we move on? I'd love to spend a few minutes talking about a potential next steps for continuing to dig in to the wicked questions and the visions and the dreams and the logistics and material realities of communal living. And there's a few of us, all of us here are in the western part of Canada, and a few of us are on the island in particular. Bonnie's in Kamloops, and Jenna is in the Fraser Valley. Tess is in Calgary. And I guess geography doesn't necessarily matter, but it also could, in terms of forming a network of folks who are interested in and in the process of living in a shared way. So I'd love to throw out, maybe I'll just start by throwing out what I have capacity for hosting or contributing, and see how it lands for folks, and see if there's anyone else who'd like to get involved, either in terms of attending or co-creating, or if there's any other ideas or suggestions for a different way to hold this. So my thought is to do a community of practice. Oops, apparently that door was open and slammed shut behind me. I don't know if you all heard that. My hope is to start a network or community of practice where one of the main things we do is have a monthly call over Zoom. So similar to this, and folks can come together, and it can be led by different folks every week, or maybe not even led very much, where there's just a container, a Zoom call, and maybe we pick a different topic. Maybe someone wants to take the lead on how we explore a certain topic, whether that's through a guided discussion or a presentation of some sorts, or even inviting in folks who might have a deeper knowledge base on that topic. And then we go through it. And I think some other infrastructure or supportive things that can help a network grow is, you know, having a really good contact list, showing what location people are in or what expertise they might be able to offer. Having a shared folder, probably a Google folder of different resources that is well indexed and easy to navigate around. And perhaps going into in-person gatherings, being able to visit each other's property, knowing who has guest rooms or places. If you want to go and visit somewhere, and knowing who might have space if people are looking to uproot where they are and reroute somewhere else and want to do that in a communal space. It's lovely to be able to get to know each other in a community and not just be like, I'm going to go and move in with a bunch of people I don't know who also like community, versus like, oh, I really resonated with this person who I've connected with and I've done a few visits and I think I'm ready to go and try living there. So that's the idea and hope. And I feel like I do have capacity to schedule a Zoom call and be there be there once a month and do some gentle facilitation, even a little more gentle than today, and including backing off completely and letting others take the lead. So what do you all think? Is that something that you'd want to take part in? Do you have any suggestions for different things to be included?
I think that's a great idea. I'd love to be part of it.
Wonderful, Tricia.
I'm in.
Was the hand
I'm
raised?
totally down for
That's
meeting
a-
monthly and building resources and getting to know each other, and yeah, for sure.
Great.
I
Build
don't
the mycelium.
because I don't know my capacity. Yeah, I'm still diving into. I'm feeling on the island, and there's a lot going on, so I'm gonna go with the flow.
That makes sense. Wonderful.
I'm gonna say yes because I think it's exactly what I needed to keep having the conversation. So easy to, like, I'm sure you saw me talking to my 3-year-old who is like, get distracted, get bogged down by all the other things. Not that she bogs me down. But that having a container to keep that thought going and to relay some of that to my husband, maybe he will want to jump in to help us continue exploring what that might look like for us here in Calgary.
Well, that's great. So what I'm seeing as a next step is picking at least just one date to start and getting into a discussion of what do we want this container to look like, who wants to be involved, and how we get started. So I'll be in touch with maybe a potential date or a poll about dates. And we can also invite other folks, and then I'll invite you all to invite other people that you know would like this conversation, and we can go from there. And if anyone is listening or watching on YouTube, I'll include a way to get in touch so that if you'd like to be part of that discussion, you can as well. Okay, well, it's 1:23. And so that means about 7 minutes left in our scheduled time. Is there anything else that feels like you would anyone else like to bring anything else up or see the question or?
I guess I'm curious and about not recreating the wheel too, because like when I think about Jasper Circus and the revillaging stuff, I haven't tracked that as much, but I kind of wonder, like, as we develop this, are there already features of this happening, and should we explore kind of how we can maybe I don't know, like it's a raggedy question. Like, are the things already out there? Like, and let's not maybe not create something that's, I don't know. Does that make sense? Like, kind of pulling in like what's all like collaborating on what's already out there, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks for naming that, Trevor. And it was on my mind as well to look into IC.org or intentionalcommunity.org. And I wonder if they have a community of practice or regional community of practice or something already going that we can join into as opposed to starting something. And it may be that they do have something, but it doesn't quite meet our needs. Maybe what I'm noticing with these podcast discussions, for example, is I know all of you in different ways quite well, and many of you know each other as well, and it brings a richness to the discussion that joining a larger group or joining a group of folks that you don't know yet may not have, but maybe there's a possibility to learn about what is going on, and maybe this is more what you mean, weave it in rather than thinking we have to start from scratch and write every document or whatever. Like
Yeah, exactly.
I think I've heard that the revillaging work that Jasper has done is I think you mentioned it, Jenna, if you'd like to speak to it.
Yeah, we actually ran a series of revillaging calls in our community based on Jasper's work with his blessings. And we used his book. There were 6 chapters in his book, and it's really good. It's an ebook. I think it's $10 or something like that. And it's really good. It has a lot of really well thought out, what are the components of community. And he also has 4 or so videos that go along with each of the 4 of the 6 themes. So yeah, there's definitely resources. There's BC Coho that does like a different aspect of this. It's kind of land matching, co-housing, but also they're moving more from co-housing into like actual land-based project, like more rural land-based projects. And so I think it would be really cool to do just a resource gathering to know like what are all the things, and then investigate, like IC.org and things like that. What is out there, and it's a great point. You're on mute, Rob.
Good, thanks. That happens
And
at least once every call. I have a preliminary list of resources around interdependence and skills and things related to interpersonal things, including co-housing and co-villaging. So I'll start with that, and we can add to it. Trevor, did you have something else that you wanted to
Yeah,
say?
I also wonder too, like the people here are people you know, and it's beautiful, it's rich, and I wonder if we could actively solicit people who we know are just have a lot of wisdom in these areas, and perhaps invite them to participate in these community practice calls and things like that. Like maybe Jasper, some people like that, who could. Yeah, I just wanna. I'm always in believe in standing on the shoulders of giants. Like just like don't recreate the wheel. We already So like, I wonder if we can solicit people who maybe we don't even know who might be interested. Who knows?
I agree.
Yeah, and it goes the other way too. I think there's things that, it sounds like from when I listen, everybody on this call has got some gifts to offer into other spaces as well. I like I mean, to me, a community of practice is small, doesn't have to be huge. It can be a bunch of people who know each other and trust each other, and basically just come together to get their own personal needs met instead of feeling like, oh, I have to join a national community of practice, because I've known about all those things out there, and they haven't interested me for whatever reason. But this one, because I know people and I value who you are, then I want to be in the midst of your wisdom. So to me, that's what community practice is bringing my curiosities and my longings into a group of people where I feel there's wisdom and that I can have, conscious conversations.
That makes sense.
Beautiful. Well, we just have 1 minute left, so I will end it there. And I'll just thank Hannah, who has been with us this whole time and contributing in the chat. I just want to acknowledge your participation in the way that worked for you today. And I also want to thank all of you for coming. It really feels, as we're on the third conversation of this series, I really feel such support and insight and experience and belonging with all of you. So thank you. Thank you for joining today. And thanks as well to everyone who tunes in over YouTube and the podcast as well. So
I have a quick question. Do we know what's happening next? What's on your next podcast? Is that determined?
oh, that's a great question. I believe, and actually Bonnie's here and maybe can confirm this, that we talked about doing a spotlight on Tapestry Collective Co-op,
Yeah.
along with the question of new paradigm ways of working and new paradigm businesses is what I would like to dive in. And Bonnie nodded, so that's what we would like to do on the next episode, which I'll just say the date before we say goodbye. It is July 11th, same time, 12 p.m. Pacific to 1:30 Pacific. So if you'd like to join, you can just hit the registration link and it'll sign you up, especially if you get the email and you can add it to your calendar. It'll give you the Zoom link for every month. So if you'd like to join, and of course, all episodes will be available to listen and watch after, whether or not you join live. Okay. Thanks so
Robin.
much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take good
Robin.
care.